I was standing in my wedding dress, surrounded by music, smiles, and raised glasses, when my husband lifted the microphone and said something that made my stomach drop. "This dance is for the woman I have loved for 10 years. The room erupted in applause. Everyone thought he meant me, but I knew the truth, because the woman he was talking about was not his bride. In that exact moment, something inside me went completely silent, not broken, not angry, calculating. And what I did after that dance is the reason he still cannot look anyone in the eyes today. Stay with me, because this story does not end the way you think it will. If you have ever been betrayed by the person who is supposed to protect you, love you, and choose you above all else, take a second and hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel for stories where disrespect meets consequences and patience turns into power. Because this story is not about heartbreak, it is about timing.
It's fine.
And the kind of revenge that feels quiet,
Okay.
but lasts forever. My name is Emily Harper, and I was 29 the year my life became unrecognizable. I had always believed in fairness, in honesty, in the small kindnesses that make life tolerable. I had grown up in a quiet town where everyone knew everyone, where secrets could not survive long, and where loyalty was currency. I never imagined that one afternoon could unravel everything I had believed about love, trust, and the person I had chosen to spend my life with. I met Jason when I was 23. He was charming in a way that made the world feel softer, the air sweeter, and the future brighter. At least, that is how he made me feel for the first few years. But charm is a dangerous thing when it is only skin deep. Behind his smiles and his carefully chosen words was a man who craved admiration more than loyalty, attention more than honesty. I ignored the small warning signs because I wanted love to win. I wanted to believe in the story we had built together. But the universe has a way of testing even the strongest faith. By the time we got engaged, I thought I knew him entirely. I had memorized the way he laughed, how he held his fork, the exact time he would roll out of bed in the morning. I thought I had predicted his moods, his quirks, the way he navigated the world. And yet, there were moments that made my stomach twist, tiny cracks that I ignored because I could not reconcile them with the man I wanted him to be. The wedding preparations were intense. I poured my heart into every detail, the flowers, the invitations, the seating charts. I wanted it to be perfect, not for anyone else, but for us. I spent nights awake imagining how it would feel to stand next to him, to promise each other everything. I imagined the first dance, the first toast, the quiet moments when it would feel like it was only him and me in the world. I did not imagine betrayal. Not like this. Jason's sister Melissa was a shadow in all of this. At first, she seemed harmless, almost sweet. She laughed at my jokes, complimented my choices, and helped me with minor details. But over time, I began to notice the way she watched him. The way her smiles lingered a little too long. The way she seemed to know what he would say before he said it. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, I had been imagining things about him for years. By the week of the wedding, small incidents had begun to gnaw at me. Invitations mysteriously disappeared. Details I had discussed for months were changed without explanation. He would give me quick, distracted answers, brush past questions, and laugh off concerns. I felt the walls of our world shifting, but I could not put my finger on why. I told myself it was stress, that it was normal for people to feel anxious before such a monumental day. I was wrong. The morning of the wedding, I woke before dawn. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant call of a morning bird. I walked through our apartment, letting my hands brush the surfaces, feeling the familiarity of the space that had once felt safe. I tried to ignore the tight knot in my stomach, the sense that the day might not unfold as I had imagined. I dressed in my gown, each button pulling me closer to a life I thought I knew, a man I thought I could trust. When I arrived at the venue, the grandeur of the hall did nothing to ease the tension inside me. I noticed subtle glances exchanged between him and Melissa. I noticed the way the photographer lingered a little too long near them, capturing something I could not yet name. And then, as I stood at the altar, holding my father's arm, I saw him. Jason smiling at me, but his eyes flicking momentarily toward her. The weight of 1,000 unspoken words pressed down on my chest, and for a moment I could not breathe. I tried to shake it off. I told myself that I was imagining it. That love was supposed to survive suspicion. That this day was ours. But the whisper of betrayal had already begun, and I could feel it winding through the room like smoke. I felt my heartbeat accelerate. Something in the air shifted. I did not yet know how completely my world was about to tilt, but I knew, deep down, that I could never unsee what I was beginning to sense. And then he spoke. "This dance is for the woman I have loved for 10 years. The words hit me like a blow I had not seen coming. The room erupted in applause. The music swelled. People smiled, but their eyes did not see what I saw, because I knew the truth. I could feel it in the way he looked at her. The way his lips curled slightly, just enough to betray a secret that belonged to everyone but me. And in that instant, the world became silent around me. Not broken, not defeated, calculating. Every sense I had, every thought, every ounce of composure, crystallized into one sharp, piercing realization. This was the moment that would change everything. And I vowed in that quiet, cinematic second that justice, however I chose to define it, would follow. After the dance, the rest of the day passed in a blur of laughter that felt hollow and photographs that felt like evidence against me. Every smile I forced was a mask, hiding the storm that had begun to build inside. I moved through the motions, nodding at family, waving at friends, pretending to toast and dance. But my mind replayed his words over and over. "This dance is for the woman I have loved for 10 years. Each repetition made the air heavier, the walls tighter, as if the room itself were conspiring against me. I noticed Melissa lingering near him, whispering something that made him chuckle. The kind of laugh that was warm for everyone else but poisonous to me. My hands clenched at my sides. I felt the pulse of heat in my chest, the rush of adrenaline that accompanies a betrayal too sharp to ignore. I told myself to stay calm, to breathe, to make it through the night. But every small interaction, every glance, every subtle touch between them felt like a knife twisting in my gut. Later, during the reception, I overheard a comment that made my blood run cold. One of his coworkers, unaware that I could hear, leaned close and said, "I cannot believe he finally chose you." Melissa always seemed like the one he truly wanted. The words struck me like lightning. I felt my knees weaken. I could not move. I wanted to scream, to storm out, to rip the decorations down and burn the evidence of this betrayal. Instead, I forced a smile, nodded politely, and walked away. But inside, something had shifted. Something dark and unrelenting had taken root. The night continued, but the atmosphere felt surreal. Every conversation, every toast, every dance was tinged with the knowledge that my husband, the man who had promised me fidelity, had chosen someone else in his heart. I could feel the whispers of the guests, the subtle glances, as if the air itself were aware of my humiliation. I retreated to the edge of the dance floor, watching him from afar, noting how his hand brushed hers just long enough to confirm the truth. I could not sleep that night. My mind replayed every memory of our relationship, looking for clues I had missed. I went over every smile, every compliment, every small act of intimacy. The cracks were everywhere, but I had been blind. I had been naive, and now, standing in the half-dark of our hotel room, listening to the soft hum of the air conditioner, I felt the weight of my anger settle like a stone in my chest. It was heavy, but precise, focused, calculated. In the days that followed, the betrayal became more than a memory. I watched him, noting the little ways he tried to act normal. The way he laughed a fraction too loudly, the way he avoided certain topics. I began to see the patterns of his deceit, the way he had meticulously hidden messages, meetings, and subtle gestures that had built this secret world. And Melissa? Oh, Melissa. She acted as if nothing had happened, smiling at me with a sweetness that made my stomach churn. She did not know that I was awake, that I was observing, that I was counting. Every interaction was a reminder that my life had been invaded, that my trust had been stolen. I began documenting everything. Texts, emails, social media interactions, small inconsistencies in their stories. I traced the timeline of their deception like a detective, noting how early it had started, how many lies had been told, how carefully they had constructed this double life. I felt a strange sense of clarity in the midst of my rage. Clarity and resolve. The same man who had thought he could humiliate me in front of everyone was now under my scrutiny, and I would not falter. The people around us began to notice subtle tensions, though none could put their finger on the truth. Friends asked if I was tired, if I was stressed. I smiled politely, the mask firmly in place. Inside, every nerve was alert, every thought sharpened by betrayal. I was no longer the naive woman who had believed in love without question. I was calculating, patient, and utterly determined. And then came the small victories that tested his composure. A misplaced message, a slip of the tongue, a detail revealed that he had forgotten to cover. I watched his reactions, his subtle panic, his attempts to regain control. It was intoxicating, like the first taste of justice long overdue. I did not act yet. I only observed, only collected, only let the tension stretch taut, knowing that when the moment came, it would shatter everything he thought he had built. By the end of the week, I realized one undeniable truth. This was not about revenge in the ordinary sense. This was about exposing a lie, reclaiming my dignity, and delivering a lesson in a way that would leave him speechless. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me even as it strengthened me, that the moment I had been waiting for, the perfect, cinematic, unforgettable moment, was drawing near. Every text I saved, every smile I forced, every observation I made built toward that singular point. And in the back of my mind, I could hear the faint whisper of satisfaction that had not yet been realized but would soon be undeniable. Days passed, but the betrayal had not loosened its grip. It was a constant presence, a shadow that followed me through the motions of my life. Every time I saw him smile, I felt the sting anew. Every time Melissa laughed in his presence, I felt the weight of my humiliation pressing down like a physical force. I could not escape it. I tried to talk to him, tried to reason, tried to ask questions, but his words were smooth, rehearsed, and empty. He smiled, he apologized, he promised, and yet nothing changed. The wound was open, and every interaction was salt in it. I reached a point one evening where I could not stand still. I walked the empty streets near our apartment, the chill of the night air cutting through the warmth of my coat. The city was quiet, the lights reflecting on the wet pavement like shards of glass. I felt the pulse of anger in my veins, a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. I realized, with a clarity that startled me, that I could no longer be a passive observer in this life. He had humiliated me, and I had let it happen. That could not happen again, not ever. The breaking point came suddenly, almost innocuously. I had gone to our local cafe, the one we had frequented in the early days of our relationship. I had hoped to find solace in the familiarity of the smell of coffee and the soft hum of conversation. But there they were. Jason and Melissa seated in the corner, laughing as if the world had no consequences. They did not notice me at first, absorbed in each other. But when our eyes met, his flicker of guiltor fear was fleeting. I saw it, and I understood the truth fully. He had underestimated me. He had assumed that I would remain small, silent, compliant. He had assumed wrong. I felt something break inside me in that moment. Not rage, not despair, but a fierce, sharp focus. The kind that comes when patience is exhausted and calculation begins. I felt every memory of betrayal crystallize into a single, undeniable resolution. This would not go unanswered. Every slight, every hidden smile, every whispered word that had been shared behind my back would be accounted for. Every ounce of humiliation I had endured would be returned tenfold. I returned home that night and began to think in precise terms. I outlined in my mind every opportunity, every vulnerability, every inconsistency I had observed. I realized that the key to satisfaction would not be shouting or confrontation. It would be subtle. It would be strategic. It would be cinematic. The more I considered it, the more I saw the full arc of the plan forming. Observation, documentation, exposure, and finally, a payoff that he would never see coming. Sleep became impossible. Every night I lay awake, replaying the small interactions, the fleeting gestures, the quiet betrayals. I thought about the day he had publicly praised another woman in front of everyone I loved. I thought about the way he had smirked when I looked away, pretending not to notice. The thought made my stomach tighten, but it also made my mind sharpen. I was no longer the bride who had been blindsided. I was now a strategist, a quiet force building toward a moment of reckoning. Every mundane moment became a chance to gather information. I watched his routines, his interactions, the way he left his phone unattended, the way Melissa unconsciously revealed their small secrets. Each discovery added fuel to the fire, but it was a controlled fire, precise, deliberate. I did not act impulsively. I waited. Every day, the anticipation made my heart pound, and yet it also made me feel alive in a way I had not felt before. I was no longer powerless. I was preparing. I began to imagine the moment of confrontation, not a fight, not a scream, but a slow, inevitable unveiling. A way to show him that his arrogance, his assumptions, and his deceit would have consequences. I envisioned the clarity of his shock, the way his composure would falter. The subtle crumbling that only a carefully executed plan could produce. The thought of it sent chills down my spine, and I realized that I had become obsessed. Not with vengeance in the crude sense, but with justice that would be impossible to ignore. And in that obsession, I found my strength. I could feel it radiating through me, a quiet, terrifying power. I had reached the point where hesitation no longer existed. There was no turning back. The moment had arrived when calculation became action, when thought became strategy, when betrayal demanded response. Every glance, every whisper, every past indignity had led me here. I stood in front of the mirror that night, looking at my own reflection, and I saw the woman I had become. Eyes sharp, posture precise, expression calm but fierce. I whispered to myself, not in anger, not in fear, but in absolute certainty, he will pay, and it will be perfect. I did not rush. That was the first and most important rule. Rushed revenge is sloppy revenge, and I wanted this to be flawless. I wanted every step to feel effortless, as if the universe itself had finally chosen my side. I spent days refining the plan in my mind, testing it from every angle, imagining how he would react, how she would react, and how the truth would unfold once it could no longer be contained. I started with silence. Silence unsettles people who rely on control. I stopped asking questions. I stopped reacting. I smiled when spoken to and said little else. Jason noticed almost immediately. He tried to fill the space with jokes, with affection that felt rehearsed, with sudden interest in my day. I watched him closely, noting the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes when I did not respond the way I used to. That flicker told me everything I needed to know. Next came preparation. Late at night, when the apartment was quiet and he was asleep, I went through his phone. My hands were steady, my breathing slow. I photographed everything: messages, dates, photos that should never have existed. Each image felt like another brick laid carefully into place. I did not feel panic or grief. I felt focus. I felt control returning to me piece by piece. Then I began laying the groundwork. I reached out to his family, not with accusations, but with kindness. I invited his parents to dinner. I spoke warmly about the wedding, about the future, about how grateful I was to be part of their lives. I made sure they saw me as composed, loving, devoted. I made sure they trusted me completely. Trust is a powerful thing when it is about to be weaponized. Melissa was easier than I expected. People who believe they have one are careless. I encouraged her. I praised her. I let her talk. She confided in me more than once, unaware that every word she spoke was tightening the net. She spoke about timing, about inevitability, about how some loves were too strong to deny. I nodded. I listened. I remembered everything. The final step required precision. I chose the setting carefully. A family gathering public enough to prevent denial, intimate enough to make escape impossible. The lighting was warm, the atmosphere relaxed, the perfect illusion of safety. I could feel my pulse in my ears as everyone settled in, laughter echoing softly through the room. Jason sat beside me, unaware that he was already standing on the edge of everything he had tried to hide. When the moment came, I stood slowly. My hands did not shake. My voice did not waver. I thanked everyone for being there, for supporting us, for celebrating love and honesty. I watched his face as the word honesty settled in the air. I saw confusion first, then tension. I began to speak calmly. I talked about trust, about vows, about what it means to choose someone publicly and privately. The room grew quiet. I could feel eyes on me, curiosity turning to concern. Then I told the truth, not all at once. Piece by piece, carefully, methodically. Each sentence landed like a controlled strike. I described the messages, the timing, the lies. I shared dates, not emotions. Facts are devastating when they are undeniable. I saw his face drain of color. I saw Melissa freeze, her confidence shattering in real time. When I revealed the evidence, when I showed the proof, the room seemed to hold its breath. Jason tried to speak. I raised my hand gently. That small gesture silenced him more effectively than shouting ever could. I told him I was not finished. I told him that humiliation had been his choice, not mine. I told him that respect, once broken, does not deserve repair. The reactions around me unfolded like a slow-motion scene. Shock, anger, disbelief. His parents looked at him as if they were seeing a stranger. Melissa stared at the floor. Her earlier bravado evaporated. Jason looked at me with something close to fear, and in that moment, I knew the execution had been perfect. I sat down calmly when I was done. No tears, no theatrics, just silence and truth. I felt a deep, steady release settle in my chest, the kind that does not fade quickly. The kind that comes from reclaiming dignity. As the room buzzed with whispers and raised voices, I remained still. I had said everything that needed to be said. The rest was no longer my responsibility. The damage he had caused was now fully visible, and there was no hiding from it. And as I watched his world begin to fracture under the weight of his own choices, I realized something that surprised me. I was not angry anymore. I was free. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. It pressed against the walls, settled into every corner of the room, and wrapped itself around Jason like a verdict that could not be appealed. No one rushed to defend him. No one laughed it off. The truth had stripped him bare, and there was nowhere left to hide. His mother was the first to speak. Her voice trembled, not with anger, but with something far worse. Disappointment. She looked at him as if she were trying to reconcile the son she had raised with the man now exposed in front of her. He opened his mouth to explain, to soften the blow with excuses, but she raised her hand and turned away. That simple gesture carried more weight than any argument ever could. Melissa finally looked up. Her face was pale, her confidence shattered. She tried to speak, to justify herself, but the words fell flat. People who had once smiled at her now avoided her eyes. She had believed she was special, chosen, untouchable. In that moment, she realized she had been nothing more than a secret that had overstayed its welcome. Jason stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. The sound echoed through the room, sharp and jarring. He tried to regain control, to speak louder, to dominate the space the way he always had. but the room did not belong to him anymore. Every word he said sounded smaller, weaker, stripped of authority. His friends exchanged looks, the kind that said everything without saying anything at all. I watched him carefully. I watched the way his shoulders sagged, the way his jaw tightened, the way panic flickered behind his eyes. This was not the man who had smirked at me on the dance floor. This was not the man who had believed himself untouchable. This was a man realizing far too late that his arrogance had cost him everything. People began to leave, one by one. Some offered quiet apologies to me. Others avoided Jason entirely, as if proximity alone might implicate them. The room emptied slowly, each departure another piece of his world collapsing. When the door finally closed behind the last guest, the air felt different, lighter, cleansed. Jason turned to me then. His voice cracked when he spoke my name. He reached for me instinctively, as if years of habit might save him now. I stepped back. The distance between us felt vast, insurmountable. I told him calmly that there was nothing left to discuss, that his choices had spoken clearly enough. That love cannot survive disrespect, and trust does not regenerate once it has been destroyed. Melissa slipped out quietly, her departure unnoticed by most. The dramatic ending she had imagined for herself never came. No confrontation, no grand declaration. Just quiet exile and the weight of shame. I did not look at her as she left. She was no longer relevant to my story. Later that night, alone in the apartment, I packed my things with steady hands. Each item I placed in my bag felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The air smelled faintly of detergent and old memories, but they no longer held power over me. Jason hovered nearby, silent now, watching the life he had taken for granted disappear one object at a time. Before I left, I looked at him one last time, not with anger, not with sadness, but with clarity. I told him that the worst part of all this was not the exposure, not the humiliation, but the fact that he had lost someone who would have stood by him if he had been honest. He had traded loyalty for secrecy, and now he would live with that choice. I walked out without looking back. The night air was cool, grounding. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of release that went deeper than relief. It was validation. Justice had been served, not through chaos or cruelty, but through truth and timing. In the days that followed, the fallout continued. Friends chose sides. Rumors spread. Jason's carefully curated image crumbled. Opportunities dried up. Invitations stopped coming. People remembered what he had done, and they did not forget Isley. Reputation, once tarnished, does not recover quietly. And me, I slept better than I had in months. I woke up without dread, without anxiety. I had taken my power back, and I had done it on my terms. I did not need his regret or his apologies. I had something far more valuable. Closure. The days after I left Jason's apartment were quiet, but they were not empty. They were full of reflection, of understanding, and of a clarity I had never felt before. I walked through the streets I had once shared with him, noticing things I had never seen. The way the sunlight caught the leaves on the trees, the rhythm of footsteps on the sidewalk, the distant hum of life continuing, indifferent to the chaos he had created. And I realized with absolute certainty that my life was no longer tethered to his lies. Karma, I thought, has a way of finding those who believe themselves untouchable. It does not hurry, it does not need witnesses, and it does not need to be cruel to be effective. Jason had built a world where deceit was convenient, where betrayal was hidden behind charm, and where consequences seemed distant. Yet in one moment, carefully orchestrated truth had pierced through, and the weight of his choices had landed with precision. I had learned that justice does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet of observation, in the collection of evidence, in the perfect timing of exposure. And yet, when it lands fully. I learned something else too, that strength does not come from fighting everyone at once. Strength comes from knowing what is worth the effort and what is not. It comes from patience, observation, and timing. I had wasted years believing that confrontation meant shouting, that power meant dominance, that love meant tolerance. I had been wrong. True strength, I realized, lies in composure, in clarity, and in the courage to act decisively when the moment is right. The world continued to move around me. Friends reached out, not to celebrate his downfall, but to reconnect with me, to remind me that I was valued for who I was, not for the drama that had unfolded. My family held me closer. I noticed small gestures of care I had once taken for granted, and I realized that the universe has a way of restoring balance, not through vengeance alone, but through a return to authenticity. As I moved forward, I made a promise to myself. I would not allow deceit, manipulation, or disrespect to occupy my life ever again. I would not shrink to accommodate someone else's duplicity. I would not ignore the warning signs, nor would I silence my instincts. I understood now that betrayal is a teacher, painful and exacting, but invaluable. It shows who is truly trustworthy. It shows who deserves your energy, shows who will respect you when they have every reason not to. I began to rebuild, slowly at first, carefully. Each decision was intentional. Every relationship I nurtured, every friendship I rekindled, and every moment I chose for myself was a reminder that I was no longer defined by someone else's choices. I had reclaimed the narrative of my life, and that reclamation was intoxicating. There was a freedom in it that I had not anticipated. The kind of freedom that comes only after the storm has passed and you realize the sun has returned brighter than before. Looking back, I do not regret the path I took. I do not feel bitterness toward Jason or Melissa. I feel clarity. I feel validation. It's cute. And I feel an understanding that life will test us in ways we cannot always predict. But those tests, as cruel as they may feel in the moment, provide the opportunity to rise stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever. I had been forced to confront betrayal in its most intimate form, and I emerged not as a victim, but as someone capable of observing, acting, and claiming what is rightfully mine. Some nights, I still remember the silence of that room, the weight of truth pressing down, the moment when all of his carefully constructed illusions fell away. I remember the calm that followed, the release that did not need drama or spectacle. And I smile, not with triumph over another, but with triumph over my own past self, the part that had allowed doubt and fear to cloud judgment. I smile because I learned that the most satisfying revenge is not just punishment, it is reclaiming yourself and stepping into life fully without compromise. Life after betrayal is quieter, but it is richer. I discovered that self-respect is a force more powerful than humiliation, that timing and patience are allies stronger than anger, that composure can deliver more impact than rage, and that when you act decisively, the universe often conspires quietly in your favor. I had taken my power back, and I would never allow it to be diminished again. If this story gave you chills, take a moment to hit the like button. Share in the comments your most satisfying revenge story. Subscribe for more stories where patience, observation, and timing reveal justice in the most cinematic ways. Your engagement makes these stories possible, and every view is a reminder that truth always finds a way.